I probably said that already over the course of the day, but I'm going to say it again. My name is Jeanne Etelin, and I'm a PhD candidate at the French department and also one of the co-organizers of this two-day event. And it's my real pleasure and privilege to welcome Jade Lindgaard for our conversation tonight. And we'll be talking about territories in resistance, so the subtitle is What We Owe to the ZAD. And so we will talk especially about the occupational movement to block an airport in Western France known as the ZAD. The ZAD is simultaneously one of the longest lasting political battles in post-war France. It's been going since the 60s, and a place where innovative practices are carried out by the inhabitants in their attempt to create an alternative social model outside of and against the state and the market. So to talk about the ZAD, we welcome Jade Lindgaard, our guest. She has visited the ZAD on many occasions, participating in both its making and its evolution, while maintaining a certain distance, at least geographically, by writing from Paris, where she extensively covers the movement for the news site Mediapart. Jade Lindgaard is a journalist specialized in environmental injustice, nuclear energy, infrastructure projects, and the movements fighting them. In the past, she has worked for Les Inrecuptibles, writing about art and social movements. She is the author of several books, including La France invisible, Occupy Wall Street, le livre du mouvement des indignés, Je crise climatique, La planète, ma chaudière et moi. And more recently, this book, Éloge des mauvaises herbes, ce que nous devons à la ZAD, donc from which I borrow shamelessly the name of our event, What We Owe to the ZAD. Alors, we decided with Jade that we will start by showing you a video taken at the ZAD. And this video is meaningful for also another reason, because it's takes as a starting point a text by Marielle Massé, who is one of our keynotes, a text entitled No Cabane. In her text, Marielle Massé identifies building huts and other shelters as an infinity of concrete and habitable spaces to imagine the form of a life to come, to imagine ways to live in a damaged world. Alors, I'm going to show you the clip. Yes.
Maybe I should just say, hi everyone, just that this video was shot last year, right after the partial eviction of La ZAD, because so the ZAD, we will speak about it just after this, but it was partially evicted last year in April 2018. The eviction was quite violent, and during the eviction, the police destroyed almost all of the sheds and these famous cabins that everyone praise were almost all destroyed. So this film was made afterwards as an act of memory of the cabin, and you will see some pictures of the destroyed cabin, but also about activities that go on La ZAD, because La ZAD keeps on existing, and we will speak about it.
Okay, on a very different note, another video.
And so, just to give a very short explanation, if I may do so. So, in that previous videos, you've seen images of many of the cabins which were destroyed by the police, but also you've seen examples of activities that go on Lazade. And one of the first actually cabin that was destroyed by the police last year in April 2018 was a collective place called Les 100 Noms, so the 100 names and the no name. It has two meanings in French, and it was a traumatic experience for everyone because Les 100 Noms was maybe one of the collective space of the ZAD, which was the more open, with the most links to outsider activists, to people supporting the ZAD from outside. And it was seen by many people on the ZAD as a non-so-radical space. And so no one expected the police to take down this place. However, it was the first shed that the police targeted and attacked. And this is this video was shot at the very moment when the police came to Les 100 Noms to destroy it.
Les gendarmes ne passeront pas, et non, les gendarmes ne passeront pas. Pour leurs expulsions, ils peuvent toujours rêver. Chaque jour un peu plus, on les fera cauchemarder. Et dans 2 ans, les gendarmes ne passeront pas. Et dans 2 ans, les gendarmes ne passeront pas. Pour leur expulsion, ils peuvent toujours rêver. Chaque jour un peu plus, on les fera cauchemarder. Et dans 3 ans, les gendarmes ne passeront pas. Et dans 3 ans, les gendarmes ne passeront pas. Ils peuvent toujours rêver, chaque jour un peu plus on les fera cauchemarder.
Et vous, la petite est tout gentille, là, sur la route. On vous oubliera pas.
Évacuez les lieux. Pour demander attention. Relevez-le. Cassez-vous, 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 cassez-vous.
Non, moi je vous le dis, ça va être la révolution. Ça va pas se passer comme ça. En fait, c'est pas possible. Vous pouvez pas nous faire un truc comme ça. C'est pas possible. On est trop soutenus. Vous pourrez pas, vous pouvez pas. Moi je suis habitant ici depuis 5 ans, vous voyez. Moi ça fait 5 ans que je m'engage ici, que je m'investis ici. Vous n'allez pas nous dégager comme ça.
Les gens ici ne sont pas violents, monsieur.
Non, non, vous n'avez pas. Non, non, je veux pas. Aïe.
So we wanted to show you these 2 clips to kind of give you a bit like put images on what we're gonna talk about. So maybe before we get deeper into the conversation, could you briefly with this? So I put together a little chronology. Maybe could you, Jade, tell us a bit more about the history of Lazade, what Lazade is, and also explain us maybe why the police tried to destroy, the state tried to destroy this place by all possible means.
So, as Jeanne was saying, this whole thing started with a movement against an airport project. So this situation happens not very far from Paris. So south of Paris is like 2 hours and a half by train, to give you an idea, near the city of Nantes. And in the countryside, at about 30 kilometers from Nantes, there has been a long history of farming. And in this precise countryside, 40 years ago, some government officials decided that it could be a good place to build a new airport, which would be like a third airport to Paris. So it was at the time where aviation thought of itself as a continuous growing industry, and France thought of itself as an economic power who needed more and more planes and more connections to the rest of the world to keep on being a superpower. So 40 years ago, they decided that we will build an airport in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, which is the name of a village in this area. And what happened is that through the years, this project was kind of forgotten, then was recreated by the socialist government in the 90s. And when the socialist government kind of reanimated this project, people in this countryside, in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, became very worried about the project and said, we will oppose this by any means necessary, by any means we can. And so what happened is that in 2008, some people living in this area issued a call for help and said, we need people to come and live with us here to stop this airport project. And starting from that, through the years, some people, a tiny number of people at the beginning, mostly with anarchist backgrounds or coming from squats in the French cities, identified this place as a politically interesting place to, at the same time, oppose the state, because the airport was a state project, and little by little discovered they could have a rich experience of autonomy. They could create an autonomous place there, because basically no one really cared about this place. And also, because of the airport project, houses and farms were given up by their inhabitants. So a number of farmers and inhabitants of this countryside left year after year, knowing that an airport would be built. And this left empty places ready for occupation. So that's why the context of Notre-Dame-des-Landes was very specific in this sense. And why is it called ZAD? It's an interesting story in a way, because at the beginning ZAD is a very administrative term. It's used by administration to identify places where they're going to build infrastructures. So zone d'aménagement différé, zone of deferred construction. And this term was, after some years, hacked by the activists who say, no, ZAD now means zone à défendre, a zone to defend. And it's interesting because now in France, when you speak about ZAD, everybody thinks of zone à défendre, but it's a total hacking from a very bureaucratic terminology. And so to make this long story shorter, in 2012, there was a first attempt of eviction by the socialist government, which failed because many people at that time came to La ZAD to defend it against the police. And so at the same time, already it was this place was seen, this local struggle was seen by some environmentalists as a national issue. But it's really the attempt of eviction and its failure that puts the ZAD at the core of many activist movements, because it's not so often that activists can resist an eviction. And so it became like a vortex, attracting many kind of people. And it's said that between 200 and 300 people lived there for many years. Now, after the partial eviction of last year, estimation is maybe 150, 170 people, more or less. It's not very easy to say. And so why did the state want to evict the ZAD? Well, for obvious reasons, right? Because they wanted to build the airport. And also because year after year, with the occupation, so with more and more people coming to live there, the ZAD had become a real autonomous space. And when we speak about an autonomous space, it's in a very frank meaning, in the sense that you saw the map at the beginning. So there was there were limits to la ZAD. Everybody knew the limits to la ZAD. There was a frontier, kind of. So designed by the state 40 years ago. And in this space, the police didn't come anymore. The state administrative, the administration services didn't come anymore. There were barricades on the roads, and especially on one road, the D281, which was covered by barricades and by cabin. Some people lived on this road, and this road had become a symbol of the autonomy reclaimed by the inhabitants of the ZAD, to the point where, after some time, the state erased this road from official maps. So as if the road had disappeared, because it wasn't accessible anymore to cars and tractors, which, by the way, created many conflicts with the farmers of the area. Airports, autonomous space, and, of course, you can imagine a nest for activism, because this had become a free place and a free space in many senses, and so a lot of activists came from there, and went there to spend some time. And to end this quick introduction, it was also seen, it had become, the ZAD had become, in government speech, a symbol of defiance, of rebellion. So at some point, a former prime minister, a socialist prime minister in France, had said that this place had to be erased. There was as the years went by, the ZAD had become a huge political symbol of total reject of government. For all these reasons, the state was seen as sort of an enemy of the state. And what happened is that beginning of 2018, the new French government announced that the airport project was cancelled. So that was seen as a huge victory by environmentalists in France, because it was the first time in a long time that the government, the state, had agreed to a movement's position against an infrastructure. But the way the Prime Minister explained the cancellation of the airport was that not for ecological reasons, nor because of the ZAD, of course, but said because there is too much disagreement among population, too much conflict around this airport to carry on with this project. And kind of in a counterbalance to the cancellation, a few months after, they decided to evict the ZAD, at least partially. And that's why to the day, until today, there is a whole discussion in movements where asked to know, was it a victory or was it not a victory? Because it was a victory against the airport, so the airport will not be built. and local authorities, by the way, who were totally for the airport, have absolutely changed their minds and now are very involved in keeping this place as a farming place and keep the forest and so on. But of course, this partial eviction of the ZAD has damaged it a lot and has created a lot of disappointment among activists, because what was destroyed was possibly the most utopian part of the ZAD, which was all this world around the cabane.
Something that something that we see in the video is like all the many different shapes for the cabins, and that we feel that it's a place where there's like many different ways of living. And when we look at this chronology, we also see that there are several possible definitions of what of a we or of a us, since it's been one of the main questions of our conference. So we see that we have historical local farmers, residents from adjacent towns, elected officials, environmental activists, libertarians, and other anarcho anti-capitalist communities such as vegan, lesbian separatists. And something that Christine Ross says about the ZAD, when she compares it to other similar movements in the United States, such as Standing Rock, like similar movements insofar as they are also rooted in particular territories, and they fight against state control of land management. And so she says that these movements in the United States have an indigenous base. And the ZAD differs from them in that it holds together people of vastly different cultures and practices with no one social or ethnic group in charge. So, like, for example, we also like have this picture, I think, which illustrates the age difference also of people living on the ZAD and defending the ZAD. And
this picture was taken in 2012, so during the first attempt of eviction.
And so if we add this variety, let's say, of people, and another thing, it's a deep suspicion in the ZAD of political representation, and they have also a culture of depersonalization, of erasing political identities, by which the Zadistes, they wear masks, they go all by the same gender-neutral name, Camille. And so my question, if we add all of that, would be, so what kind of collective subjects are we dealing with in La ZAD?
It's a very interesting question to raise after all we heard today, because I think this is a very specific and exciting but difficult laboratory. But just to precise on what you were saying, the Camille thing, it was going on with the media. Like on the ZAD, people called them each other by names, usually not their real names, a lot of nicknames, like activist nicknames. But when interfering with outsiders, so media mostly, but sometimes other outsiders, they would refer to them as Camille as a way to avoid personification. So it was a very strong political statement. And the same with the masks. Some of them, not all of them, wore the masks during action or during demonstration. And we will see some of the masks were masks of animals, either birds or yes, tritons. I was like, I knew, I looked it up before to see how to say it in English. Tritons, to embody the richness and their link to this countryside and these lands and the ponds and the forest they wanted to defend. So what kind of we? It's a diffracted we, it's a plural we, and it's a moving we. In the sense that many people who spent some time on the ZAD in the past years went by, stayed a bit there, went away, came back. So there's always been a lot of going around on Lazad. Not so many people have stayed there the whole time. So that's one difference with territories fight here. It's of course, it's always been a living place, a place where people live, but also a place that people leave and come back to or not, depending on their experiences there. So we could say that, interestingly, the we of the ZAD was very plural because in this we, you had people living on the ZAD, you had people supporting the movement, you had people who had called for them, so the farmers in the beginning who said, please come and help us defend this territory. And all these different kind of people, different ages, different political cultures, diversity of tactics, very important. Some of the people supporting the ZAD movement were in favor of demonstrations, maybe offensive demonstrations, but demonstrations mostly. Some of the people were thinking that the only way to oppose the airport and the company, Vinci, who wanted to build it, was to sabotage. So to do sabotage, to burn down machines, to scare away anyone linked to the airport process. And so that diversity of tactics have always been very conflictual among the movement, because a lot of disagreement, but was a basis, in a way, in spite of all the conflicts and disagreements, was kind of what linked all these people together. And of course, the we was really solidified by the opposition to the airport. And one of the big slogans of the ZAD has always been contre l'aéroport et son monde, against the airport and its world. And that's very interesting because speaking to people who spend some time there, many times what I heard was people saying we're maybe most committed, more committed against the world than against the airport. Like it could have been basically anything else. A highway, a big farming project. Some of the people, Jeanne, you mentioned it, some of the people living on the ZAD were anti-spacist, meaning they opposed farming, they opposed farming with cattle, and many conflicts aroused between people living on the ZAD, opposing local farmers who wanted to go hunting, for instance. So this we was always conflictual. And in that sense, maybe something to keep in mind is that in that sense, the ZAD was never a community. It was never a homogeneous community. I think in that sense, it's different from a squat. It's different from grassroots communities fighting oil pipes or this kind of infrastructure. It was more a commune. And the commune, the Paris commune, the Chiapas communes are very strong references on the ZAD. And I must say, in spite of all their political differences, a common reference among the inhabitants. So, maybe the other thing I can say on that subject is that in the end, what you realize is that the unity of the we was very much linked to the land occupation. So there was a ZAD because there was a land, and there was a specific space. So you could have this huge diversity of people because there was a common enemy, and because there was a place, a material place. And the fact, so with Jeanne, we chose some quotes from people living on the ZAD. I took them out of one of the reports I did there. And and to show you examples of what people there say, because I should have said at the beginning, I've never lived there. I'm an outsider from the ZAD, and you have to bear in mind that there are as many ZADs as people who live there, and talking about it outside is always an issue. Because people there are very, very, very concerned with the risk of reduction of their experience, because it was so plural and so diverse, and like I was trying to say. So these are just examples of what some people say. They do not represent a general position. There was never any general common position on the ZAD. But so yeah, linked to the strong sense of place, a material place, and because you live on the same place, you create many connections. And like one of the quotes say, it's what they managed to do, or what they intended to do, or they just experienced, was the end of a division between your civil life and your political life. Like most of us with our jobs or doing our studies in a city, if we are politically committed, during a week, you have the time at your job, you have some time with your friends, some time with your kids when you have some, and maybe on Saturday you're going to demonstrate, I don't know, against Trump or for abortion rights or for climate change. Okay, so you have a division of time between your civil life and your militant activist life. Under that, this division is cancelled, is erased. You live, one of them told me once, when you sleep, it's political. When you breathe, it's political. When you eat, it's political. Yeah, you live in a political zone. And why is that? Because you're occupying a place. And because the people around you have all come for the same purpose. And this has created a very specific energy and a very specific energy, because at the same time, it never ends. So it's very exhausting. And many people, some people who left the zone left because they were too exhausted. It was too demanding, because in a way, it never stops. And you can always do more against the airport, against capitalism, against patriarchy, and you're never enough against dominations and so on and so on. At the same time, it creates an incredible energy within the inhabitants, but also with the outside. And there are many stories of people who didn't live there, but at some point brought bricks to help build a wall, brought wood to help build a cabin, brought food, brought coffee, brought clothes, because it was a material space. It was a space that you could help bringing material stuff. So it was at the same time difficult to access it, because it scared a lot of people away with the barricades and the mask and the camis and the anarchist kind of culture. It scared many local people away, but it also attracted a lot of people. So this material experience of occupying a space was very super important. And maybe I can finish answering your question by saying that some of them described their movement as a movement of composition as opposed to convergence. Like in France, as many of you know, one of the regular slogans in political movements is convergence des luttes. So we're trying to converge. We're trying to have all the fights, all the struggles converging to one point, but we never know which point. And this energy of converging to a point has the big drawback of choosing one point, right, against the other one. So that's why some people there who wrote texts and published books about their experience, it's a group called Mauvaise Troupe, have theorized the idea of composition. And the composition of a movement, what is interesting is that theoretically, in a composition, everyone have their space. So it's a mosaic of identities and strategies together and not a convergence. And so that leaves space also to form a we with the non-humans. And I think at some point in this PowerPoint, we have a picture of a demonstration in Nantes. Yeah, that one. So that was in 2014, which was a very important demonstration in the story of the movement, because it was the first big demonstration in Nantes, so in the city, against the airport, with people coming from the ZAD, plus farmers with 40 tractors, if I remember well, and people coming from all over France, demonstrating in Nantes against the airport. During this demonstration, damages were done to banks, some stores, transportation utilities, and these damages had triggered a huge controversy against the ZAD, people saying, but they're like terrorists. A lot of very strong words were used against them. So it was a very traumatic experience for the movement. The reason that we chose to show you this image is because at the same demo, they used these masks. They had spent weeks and weeks making, because they're all handmade with paperwork. And they're I think, a very good image of what some of them tried to do. As far as not a political identity, but a political subjectivity and a sensible subjectivity was emerging and was being created on the ZAD, with a very strong association to some animals. And I must say that to that matter, that naturalists, so people who are really, really have a very deep knowledge of vegetation and animals, have been a very important part of the movement. Some of them not really anti-capitalist or not at all anarchist, but driven to the zone because of the necessity to defend its non-human inhabitants against the airport. And they did this incredible work of mapping the zone, like small bit by small bit, and mapping all the species that live there in order to symbolize the number of living beings on the zone threatened by the airport, but also in order to help the different acts in front of justice that were brought by the opponents to the airport through the years. So diversity, another kind of diversity of tactics.
So you've mentioned the importance of place in this composition of a movement and of a we, and like living together and doing things together, inventing a new way of living together. And so I think it's very interesting because it's true that 10 or 15 years ago, anti-globalization movements were essentially transnational, and they were essentially organized around international summits and counter summits. And this is something you've worked on as well, anti-globalization movement. And now today we are witnessing instead a sort of relocalization of politics, like or at least a politics of the local. And that's something Laurent Jean-Pierre talks about in his books on the Yellow Vest and the way they use roundabouts as a way to create solidarity. But we could also think of public squares in Nuit Debout, Occupy Wall Street, also during the Arab Spring. And so it seems to be there's a new grammar of collective action and politic action that changes from like worker movements, which inscribes their struggles in the workplace and makes demand directly to the state. And the other difference I see with La ZAD is that the fact that they occupy a place is linked with living in this place. And Geneviève Pruvot has a beautiful text on that, like habiter comme geste politique. And so they experience solidarity, direct democracy, and autonomy. And so my question is, how is the ZAD, according to you, contributing to a renewal of democracy or of democratic practices.
It's very interesting because the fact that it was seen by many intellectuals and some maybe more classical activists as a local movement has had the consequence that for many years the ZAD was kind of isolated from other movements. And it took a lot of time for, I would say, more classical left-wing intellectuals to pay interest in the ZAD because they saw it as some kind of farming people somewhere against an airport without seeing that it was, of course, very site-oriented, very locally oriented, but was also very dynamic and very open to other movements. So what does it bring? I think one of the lessons of this movement is a critique of democracy, a criticism of democracy. And I will explain why. It's not that they are anti-democratic, they're not for a tyranny, of course, they're not for a dictatorship, but they have this very, developed critique of democracy in the sense that it's because of democracy and in the name of public interest that the state wanted to build the airport. That's why at the beginning I was referring to the 60s and this moment when Trente Glorieuses, when French economy and identified so much with growth and with building infrastructures. This was not only to develop economy, it was also to support kind of the power of France as a nation. And so what happened is that when this airport project was reactivated by the socialist government in '98, they said they wanted to do so to create jobs, to create economic activity, to help develop this area. And so in the name of public interest. And so when the farmers started to oppose it and the first occupants came to the ZAD, the government and local officials and local elected people confronted them with that and said, you are against public interest. And they say, the ZAD people say, no, we are the common interest. So there was this whole conflict between the way the state used the public interest argument versus this kind of, not so new, but let's say new, to make things more simple, this new kind of attachment, of political attachment with the idea of a common. We are, and they were saying, as a state, you fail, you are failing. You are failing in your obligation to protect nature. You are failing to your obligation to protect farming, local farming. And today, since maybe the past 5 years, you are failing to your obligation because linked to climate change. It's destructive of climate to build an airport. It's destructive of climate to destroy a wet zone because that is also a wet zone. Its biodiversity is not extraordinary, but it is a biodiverse zone. But its quality for naturalists is that it is a wet zone. And so it triggered a very interesting conversation actually on the matter of who decides what's public interest. And what happened is that when the eviction took place, so last year in 2018, it was very interesting to see and very actually traumatizing to see that the state used like military equipment to evict the ZAD. So thousands and thousands of police people were sent to the ZAD. Whereas you have to bear in mind that France is still under terrorist threat. So, I mean, the police has many things to do. No, they had chosen to send like 40,000, if I remember well, troops to the ZAD to evict 200 people. It's an interesting ratio. Using an armored vehicle that we saw in the film at the beginning, because it was eventually defeated because it fell down in a ditch, actually, at some point. And tons of grenades. So there were many people injured during the eviction. And so some people from the ZAD gathered all the grenades, all what was left of the grenades, and using 2 tractors, brought them back to the prefecture, so to the state office in Nantes. The 2 women, farmers who did that, were then prosecuted by the government for I don't know, insult or something like that. Just to give you a bit more about the atmosphere, very, very conflictual. But so what I meant to say is that with the eviction, this discussion took another color in a way, because, okay, the necessity of defending public interest in the state's view was carried through by the use of military and very strong police force. And that's triggered another discussion about, okay, but what is public interest? Is that public interest? And many people said no. And many people who had felt apart from the ZAD at this point decided to support them and to be more in solidarity, because, of course, everyone can understand the contradiction between the use of that level of force with that level of disproportion and the argument of the public interest. So you will say, okay, but if they're not using democracy, what is their reference? What do they want and what do they defend? Well, so as we say before, you would get very diverse responses, very diverse answers on to that. But mostly, again, I think the common answers would be autonomy, self-organization, and commune. So the anti-state culture of this movement is very strong. And it has very concrete consequences, which I found really fascinating, because it goes from build your own house, collective housing without obeying the norms, taking care of cattle without respecting the neoliberal and industrialist norms of contemporary farming, try to stay as much as possible away from markets. So there was a market, a common market, le non-marché, so the no market, on the ZAD, where people could, from la ZAD, could bring vegetables, fruits, bread, cream, cheese, whatever they had done, milk, and to share with the other inhabitants or with people who support them and who would come to the no market. There was a radio station also, Radio Klaxon, which was actually broadcast through hacked airwaves. Like on French highways, you have a specific radio to inform you if there's a traffic jam or an accident. Well, on the ZAD periphery, they had managed to hack the airwave, and when you came to la ZAD with your car or any car, if you organize your radio to listen to this specific airwave, at some point it's like this, and you had the ZAD voice coming. So. I mean, it was really, it was a great idea, I think. And so all that to say, what I found very interesting is that it's autonomy and self-organization in a very concrete understanding. And that's a very specific experience because, of course, we have many squats and many countries have many squats. You don't have that level of space. It's not that often. And it's also, but it's not only about, sharing meals, of course, living together, sharing meals, so making decisions together, deciding together how you live, and the different collectives, the different groups who existed there all have their own rules. So it doesn't mean it was a no-rule zone. It was never a no-rule zone. Groups had their own rules, limitations. Like this group was more, you had the anti-species groups, and you had farming groups. You had groups where dogs were totally free, and groups where dogs were forbidden. not to scare the cattle, the hens, or other animals. Some groups were strictly vegan. Other ones ate meat. So that level of very concrete diversity. But kind of tried to maintain maybe some kind of institution between them, thanks to a General Assembly meeting, thanks to a newspaper. There was a common newspaper on the zone that was distributed every week, through a specific system of policing. And if you want, later we can talk about this, but it was a no police zone, but they had tried to organize a kind of self-regulating system, because of course on a zone like that, with almost unlimited access to anyone, you have tons of problems, and tons of problems going from drunk people, aggressive drunk people, drug dealing, and sometimes violence, like people hitting one another, and sometimes even violence against women. So very soon they figured we had to find something. So they tried to find an organization, and so. Why is it relevant to our discussion today? I think it is relevant in the sense that it offers answers to a general system in crisis, right? Like our economies are producing massive pollutions and climate change. They try to live and organize themselves in a way that would not prevent, but lower at the maximum damages to the nature. Our representative democracy is in a very bad condition, as we all know. They try something else, like self-organization and inclusiveness, horizontality, no leader, no representative, no delegation of power. All these decisions have many drawbacks and bring a lot of difficulties. So it's not at all an ideal place. And for all the discussions I had there with the people living on Azad, no one ever said it's an ideal place. It was a very hard place to live, very demanding, with a lot of stress. So it's not at all idealistic, not at all. But it is a concrete experience on a long basis, because this kind of first history of the ZAD lasted 10 years on quite a big space. So that's, I think, for France, it's unique. And in that sense, I think it's an answer. And also, it's an answer in the sense that, to me, one of the thing I learned there personally is the fact that you cannot be only in theory or only in empirical actions. Like on the ZAD, people at the same time write texts and take care of cattle, build houses, and issue very long political statements. The whole zone was organized against the division of work between intellectuals and manual work. And I think that's something very interesting, because to me it's very linked to what climate change today requires of us. This necessity of relearn. How do you build a house? How do you keep a house warm without too polluting a device? How do you make your own food? Why does it make sense to build your house with wood growing where you live? You know, all these statements they have made, saying we want to be as close as possible as the land that we defend, to become the land that you defend, to me is how can I say, very inspirational, but also very much in the sense of what we need to do as people living under this climate change age. And maybe another thing on that matter is that for the people who were here this morning when Marielle Massé spoke, at some point she spoke about les nous, the nous, so these ditches which retain water. And are many in this area. Well, one of the groups on the ZAD today who try to maintain the spirit of the cabane have called themselves les nous qui poussent. So the growing ditches, the growing nous. And so it's another example of how much linked they have tried to be to their territory. But it's a linkage, it's links that are never only restricted to local issues.
Thank you. I think it's true that the Z has become this kind of a concrete answer for a lot of thinkers who think about like the ecology, climate change, the Anthropocene discourse. And so the Z has become like a very major reference. And we do understand why, because of course, the we of the Anthropocene is problematic. We know that the mess is caused by industrial capitalist societies, and so we see how the Z is against precisely what society produced, the Anthropocene. But on the other hand, the Anthropocene it's also the we of the Anthropocene is also problematic in a second way. Because it's wrong to say that we are all on the same boat. We know that the impacts of environmental degradation are unequal. Like let's think about Hurricane Katrina. It affected mostly Black poor communities, and so I think of that because there's like two criticisms that have been made to the ZAD. One of them is actually published in the book you edited, Éloge des mauvaises herbes, and was written by Amandine Gay, who's an Afro-feminist. And she contends that the ZAD has survived, that the fact the ZAD has survived for so many years is the expression of a white privilege. And she ask them to rethink that, to like, why, if we go to the ZAD, we only see white people. The second criticism actually comes from within the ZAD via a text entitled On Class Contempt. And it's a text written by a group of Zadistes who come from like a street culture with very few education, and they in this text it's addressed to other Zadistes who come from the middle upper class, who are educated, and they're saying that il y a les arrachés d'un côté et les autres, j'ai oublié leur nom. Enfin, the privileged one. Their reproche is that they're imposing normative behaviors, such as the fact that if someone gets angry at a meeting, they're excluded. And they see that as class contempt, because not everyone has been educated to not lose temper in a meeting. I was wondering, how do you react to this criticism? What does it change for you when you think about the ZAD as being a concrete answer, and as being and what also you think? How do this criticism also impact the way you think about climate justice in general?
So maybe I will start with the second criticism. So the class contempt criticism, which this criticism has been going on as long as the ZAD has existed, I think, and is the reflection of the fact that, you found on the zone some people with education, sometimes high education, like some like really like learned engineers for instance, who had decided to give up completely with their former social world. Whereas you also found people with no education at all, or with a very conflictual history with the school system, who had escaped from their houses. Some of these people were really super young. I mean, some of the people on Azad were not even 18. So you had this very big diversity of people. And yeah, I mean, this. What can we say about this? Well, we can say that first, the ZAD is within society, and so the violence of society and the dominations of society are still there, even though everyone on the zone, or many people on the zone, tried as much as possible to oppose domination. I mean, dominations are super hard to get rid of. And maybe some people would say that the fight against domination wasn't at the core of the ZAD political project, because its political project was to, before everything else, oppose the airport and oppose the state. This created a frame, a political frame of fighting, an enemy, a common enemy, more than maybe transform yourself. And I think that the lesson maybe we can learn from that is that it takes a lot of political work to go against dominations, and even in very politically conscious worlds, we know, I mean, that many dominations keep on going on, whether it's racism or contempt to women or ageism. I mean, in all movements I've known and seen and participated, there's always domination phenomenon. It's not an excuse at all. It's just to say that, to me, the lesson is that it shows how hard it is to fight this. And it also shows maybe that if you really, really want to fight dominations, you probably have to make it at the core of your agenda. And so organize yourself as a movement or as a commune or as a squad. Organize almost everything around the attempt to attack these dominations. And it's very interesting. It always, I feel very moved, actually. I felt very moved when I heard some of these street kids say that they felt weak, or they felt disempowered almost, speaking in a general assembly next to someone who spoke very well. I think it's very sad, but it's unfortunately the reality of it's a social reality, and probably because of the fight, because of the stress, because of all the hardships they had to go through, probably didn't pay collectively enough attention to that. And for the race issue, I think it's the reason why I proposed to Amandine Gay. I asked her actually to write a text in the book Defending the ZAD, because, well, first I was always stricken by the whiteness, the obvious blatant whiteness of the ZAD, and also because it's such how can I say, dynamic place politically. I thought it wouldn't make sense to publish a book with only very positive text on them, that they could take it. This text triggered a lot of controversy. The Amandine Gay text, I can tell you, but I'm still glad that we published it, because this whiteness is not only happening on the ZAD. Basically, in France, environmentalist, alternative movement, anti-capitalist movement, anarchist kind of movement, they're massively white. And because people there are massively anti-racist, the race issue is never really raised, or not enough raised. And I think this has to be discussed now. We can no longer have movements of this kind with this level of radicality and this importance, I think, for the time we are living, without collectively try to discuss this issue. And so Amandine Gay came to Le ZAD which was very interesting to screen her film, her documentary, Ouvrir la Voie. I think it's Speak Up in English. Speak Up, which is a documentary about with a black women living in France and Belgium about their experience of what it means to be a black woman in a predominantly white society. And she came to the ZAD. She came and she told them what she wrote. She told the people who came to her screening, which I found quite brave. And people's reaction was very interesting because all of them kind of agreed. Yeah, of course we agree. It's a problem. I mean, it's a problem, or it's a limit. Our movement is limited on this issue. Everyone who spoke recognized it. At the same time, they say, "But what can we do?" And she challenged them and say, "If I come back in 3 years and it's still the same, it means that you wouldn't have taken this problem as seriously as you should." And some people felt angered by what she said, because some of them have been doing works for years with migrants, with refugees. Like on Azad, there are many collective cuisines, cooking squads who went to cook for refugees in Calais, northern France, in Vintimille, near the Italian border. There's always been undocumented people on Azad, not many, but still. And today you have many refugees living there, sometimes with their family. So, I mean, it's not 100%, so it's not a white supremacist space at all. But I think it is still in the undergoing the color blindness phenomenon that is so strong in France. Let's see what happens. Like for 10 years, almost all the energy was used against the airport, against the state, diversity of tactics. Now that the airport has been abandoned, maybe it can create new spaces for political discussion of this kind. I mean, this idea. This idea of the necessity of more racial diversity finds its way, because I know that in December some people from Polynesia will come to the ZAD and speak about their struggle for recognition against damages done by all the nuclear bombing experiences in Polynesia until the 90s. They have many links to Chiapas, Rojava. And sad to think of it nowadays, but with Rojava experiences, also with a fight going on in French Guyana against a golden mine. So I mean, there are connections, and the last thing, and we discussed this with Jeanne, is that there is a common experience between Lazad, young people from the suburbs, and now yellow vest people. It's the experience of police brutality, and this has allowed or triggered the creation of networks, solidarity networks between some anti-police brutality collectives and groups. And in France, most of them are based in the suburbs, and most of them are led and organized by brown and black people. And so some of them came to the ZAD. There were a number of meetings. And so there are connections, and probably that the best way to create these connections without being too artificial in its attempt is to do concrete political work together. And this common endeavor against police brutality is certainly something that creates a lot of links between them.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, there's we can also mention that someone lost their hand on Lazad, like with the yellow vest. There's been like really like the police brutality is becoming like a massive phenomenon in France more and more. So maybe one last question before we open it to the floor. So my question is that it's actually going to be a mix of two, but one of them is like, so you published this book, What We Owe to the ZAD, and so since we've been talking about the pronoun we so much, I just maybe quickly, who is this we and what we owe to the ZAD? And second, how do you position yourself as a journalist with respect to a social movement that rejects representation? And so I think, to just conclude on that, and then we'll.
Okay, so the we of the book, it's a we. It's a political act. It's an act of solidarity. The book was published right after the eviction of the ZAD, and it was a reaction to this eviction and a way to say we feel. In full solidarity with the people whose cabin had been destroyed, and because we were very shocked by this eviction. It also comes from a previous project, like 2 or 3 years before the eviction. A number of us, authors and writing in this book, had been involved in what we had called a barricade of words. And it was because 3 years before there was a threat of eviction, and some people from La ZAD and notably from the library there called Le Talus, which means the slope thing, more or less, Le Talus, had reached out to some of us, so journalists, writers, researchers, scholars, and so on, to say, okay, we need you. You say you like us. Now we need you to help us. And so we figured this barricade of words, which was an abécédaire. We wrote all together. We presented at the EHESS, so School of Social Science in France, and we came to the ZAD to read some of the texts we had done, and we had make some kind of promise. If you are evicted, we will build a barricade of words to protect you. So this was not enough, obviously, but it was kind of a way to keep the promise, and to say, and maybe regarding the we thing, it was also a way to state that even though we have total respect for the specificity and the singularity of the experience of the Zadist living on the zone, we wanted to make the statement that to us, this story is also ours. Not to say that we want to own it. It's not at all to appropriate what they've gone through, but to say that we think that what they're doing is that important that it also is a source of inspiration to us. So it was also a way to kind of go over the borders of and the frontiers of the ZAD, saying, no, to us it's not a local issue, it's not a local story, it's our story. And it's our story in the sense that we feel solidarity and we learn from you. And so it was a way to say that. And also, and I can speak for myself, and that would also answer maybe your other question, the fact to say that, it was also a way to say that, to acknowledge that for us, outsiders, sympathetic supporters, but outsiders from the ZAD, their experience has been transformative. Like, and I know for me as a journalist, it has been transformative. Like, in the sense that when you're a journalist, and probably when you're a researcher also, there's always this tendency to believe in objectivity, and to believe in the necessity of a reasonable distance between your subject and you as a researcher or as an author. And to me, this distance was straight away erased on the ZAD, because it was impossible to be there and being distant. So from the very beginning, the work as a journalist I've done on the zone and its inhabitants and all these projects was always a supportive one. And I said so. I mean, I wrote it that I was. It made me kind of come out. I can say politically in this sense, saying, okay, I'm for them, but that doesn't. It still allows me intellectual space to see what is problematic on this space in the zone, and to see the conflicts and the dominations and the class issues and so on. But I cannot pretend I watch them from outside, because it's not true, because for all the reasons I've tried to explain, I think it's very important experience. And so it was transformative for me, because it has, this experience has influenced the rest of my work, and has led me to be maybe more daring in my deconstruction of this objectivity kind of norm. But I know it's controversial, and many journalists in France would yell at me, and it's not a good way to do your job. But I've been undergoing this process, and I think now when you work on social movements, you cannot not ask you what if your writings are possibly detrimental to the movement. I can put it this way. And for instance, I've spent a lot of time there, and a lot of time. So I've been there many times. And when I go there, I sleep at people's houses. I eat with them. I do work with them, because it doesn't make sense to just go watch. You have to go do things with them to understand what goes on, and to be, on the same level, not like someone watching them from above. So I live with them when I'm there, and it's not possible to. It's also out of honesty. Without with regards to their situation, and so at the beginning it was a bit strange, because many of them are against media, and the anti-media state position is very strong in French movements, in French radical movements. There's a very strong criticism of journalists and media, and some of the collectives had banners like "No journalist" and in red, and so some of them I think hate me for what I done, because for them it's a betrayal of their no journalist rule. I've always tried to be as respectful as possible of them, and I think we've managed with many of them to create trust, and this trust was for me never print something that could be helpful to the police. So no identification, sometimes deliberate blur on the stuff I described. And never put my, excitement as a journalist to discover really crazy things, never put it before what the movement was trying to achieve. And in this way, we managed to kind of find a way to be companion of one another.
All right. Hello. Thank you so much for all the information and perspective. It's really encouraging. Okay, so I was in Standing Rock, which you mentioned briefly, at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, and but then the next year, at the beginning of 2018, I was living in France and encountered some French people who told me all about La ZAD. And I was so interested in all of that, but they had no concept of Standing Rock and the movement going on in the United States. So I was just wondering, from your perspective, if there was conversation about Standing Rock while you were in the ZAD, or if there was dialogue between those two groups. And yes, the relation between those similar, but at the same time, very different movements.
It's a very important question, because yes, from what I know, because as I said, I didn't live there, so I haven't attended all conversations, but I know that some conversations were organized specifically on Standing Rock. And that actually some people who had participated in the Standing Rock movement came to the ZAD to speak about it. And because I haven't said that, I haven't mentioned that, but the ZAD was always a very international place. So not only French people, and so some American people at some points came, left, came back, and so on. So connections were made with the Standing Rock movement, but also with many other anti-infrastructure movements. I don't know, like 3 weeks ago, I was there, and there were some people, indigenous people from Indonesia, who musicians, activists, who organized a whole speech about their fight against infrastructure projects in Indonesia, and one of them was the reforestation, like industrial reforestation. It was very interesting. But so yeah, there was connection with Standing Rock, and it was the issue, solidarity, messages to the movement. So it was. They've always tried to make connections, make connections with anti-infrastructure movements.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to know sort of about the ways in which the movement organized itself towards an exterior, whether, so I assume they used social media a lot, and I'm sort of interested in how this spatiality of the virtual that they engaged with, and that was also sort of a source of, well, identity for them insofar as they could sort of, well, have other people partake in their struggle that were not present there, has informed their notion of the geography, because it seems there's sort of two geographies at work here. So there's sort of the dwelling in the place, right, and sort of the engaging with nature, but there's also sort of an outreach that is somewhat self-organized and doesn't work through traditional media channels. And this is sort of a different spatiality with different fringes, sort of a different geography, and how do these two relate? And I assume there must have been also vivid discussions within it about it. So if you could speak more to that.
Yeah, totally. It was always very conflictual. This issue was always very conflictual. Like one of the conflicts was about path. Because, so this zone was reserved 40 years ago to build an airport. That means that some places had grown wild. You know, vegetation had grown wild. And when the occupation started, the Zadist people spent a lot of time just cutting down, and cutting out branches and crazy vegetation that didn't allow for some of them to build caban sheds and so on. And so after some years appeared the problem of the path, like because it was quite a big zone, they needed to be able to circulate in it. And so what happened is that at some point, some supporters committee de soutien, who were formed starting in 2012, said, maybe one thing that we can do as people who want to support the occupation movement without living there would be to help you cut paths and take care of paths, so that it can be more easily possible to walk or to bicycle through the zone. And it could be also a way to invite local residents from the villages around the ZAD to have a way to access it and to show that it's not like a closed down area, but it's open to walkers and people who like to take a walk. But some other people on Azad said, wait a minute, where are you going to build those paths? Because if you're going to do it there, it's where there is wilderness. Well, in a French meaning, you understand me. There's some kind of wilderness. We don't want human beings to be walking there and to come with their cans of Coke and their sandwiches, wraps, and to throw everything away and leave all their dirty stuff in nature. So no, we want to protect the zone and we don't want the path. So there was conflict about that, which I think embodies quite well these different geographies being at stake. So in the end, the path builders people, if I may say so, kind of won, and it kind of relates to the discussion we were referring to, like how can I say this? The people who on Lazad who gave the most importance to strategic organization were also the one maybe with the most intellectual background, and also the ones the more keen on creating links with the outside world, whereas the more street kids kind of people were also the ones more interested and more attracted to a radical degrowth experience, in radical autonomy experience, living, some of them without electricity, in self-built, very small sheds, and more reluctant to be in connections with the rest of society. And so this actually geographical issue raised and fed the class kind of issue on the zone. And so that's one example. So to my knowledge, this tension has always existed. Some people wanted others to come in from outside, and some others saying, no, if we do so, if we open the zone too much, it will endanger the coherence of our political project, which is to fight domination and fight capitalism and so on. And you were referring to social media. It's interesting because they were very bad at social media. Like the use of social media came very late in the story of the ZAD. I think it's actually something that you find in many radical movements in France. There is a very big distrust of internet, communication technologies, and social media. So after some years, a media group was created, and this media group very late on started a Twitter account, but like maybe in 2017, so very late on, and not really knowing what to do with it. So, but however, they've had a website for a very long time, and this website was very important because it was a way to communicate with the rest of the world and also communicate about the conflicts of the ZAD, because the rule was that anyone could publish on the website. So and it was also used for archives, like the films, pictures, and so on. Yes, yeah, exactly. And Radio Klaxon was also on the website, exactly, yeah.
Because we talked about the history of the ZAD, what it was, but now that the airport is cancelled, there's a lot of people, and there was this very violent expulsion, and so a lot of people actually left, and the people who are staying, they're facing, I think, a very interesting issue, which is, so they had this very alternative experience, social experimentations, like of farming and other communal lives. And now the state asks them to translate that into acceptable juridical language. And I wonder, how is that? Could you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, so it's a kind of a complex administrative situation, but to make it short, so after the eviction, the state said, either you legalize yourselves, either we keep on evicting you. Huge conflict on the zone, really very, very strong and bad conflict actually between one another. And eventually what happened is that at this point, many people left saying, okay, I'm never going to live in a legalized squat. I'm not interested in that. Some other people decided to try it and say, okay, let's give it a try and see what we can save from our history within a legalized frame. So they have, these people have entered an administrative process which is the way farming is organized in France. When you are a young person and you want to become a farmer, you have like a 3-year kind of process where you explain to the state and local authorities and local farming authorities what your project is, what income you expect from it, and employing, creating how many jobs you want to create. So this kind of questions. That's why for anarchist people it was a total dilemma to accept or not to do so. And so the thing is that, okay, that's maybe the disadvantage or the big drawback of the legalized situation. The good point, the advantage is that if you accept to enter this process as a young person, you have priority in access to land. And then they figured that it could be a way to keep on the fight, but with another frame, because now they could use also to their advantage the legalization. Like legalization has been a very bad violence against them, but they realized afterwards that the legalization had also brought them new weapons. And this weapon was in the access to land, or access to land is at the core of the ZAD story from the beginning. And so today, to make it short for you, because it's difficult to describe, what happens now is that the ZAD people have been authorized by the state to keep a number of acres, and the rest of the ZAD has been distributed between the historic farmers who had always fought the airport, but also the local farmers who had not fought the airport. So now there's conflict between all these people to know who will be authorized to use which land. And in this fight, the Zadist people now have this new argument for them. And some of them have created what they call coopérative bocagère, so a cooperative. And this co-op wants to keep on fighting the state and keep on fighting capitalism through the most collective possible organization of farming. So sharing tools, sharing seeds, sharing accountability, sharing money, in order that they can all save some time to do activism and not be, kind of enslaved to a farming work, because farming is very demanding, and it's once you started to get involved in a farming activity, it's very hard to find time to do something else. And so they try to share time in order to save some time to do activism or to go do other stuff. And so that now it's the beginning of something, and they are very humble when they speak about it. The ones who are involved in this cooperative, they say, please say that we're not sure that if we will succeed. Say that we're not saying it's a model. We're just trying something. But it's I think it's very interesting, because it shows that the fight against the state is not only fought on barricades, but maybe it's the bets they're making, maybe can be still fought through bureaucratic and not bureaucratic, but in the legalized administrative frame.
Yeah, I just think it's very interesting, because there's like a very turning point in the history of the moment, which was like, okay, we're a movement against the state. Then we become a space outside of the state. And now they're like trying to survive via the tools that the state itself can provide. But I think the limit of that, and it's again the same point, is like, if you want to use those tools, like all those bureaucracy, juridical, administrative things, you need a certain intellectual background. You need resources in order to understand how how the system works. But I think it can be very inventive in how we think about private property and like the commons. But yeah, but maybe there's.
Thank you. Okay, so for basically every question that's been asked, you've answered, well, there was a great disagreement, and some people were over here and some people were over here. What did that look like? It sounds like everyone at the ZAD had a fundamental anti-state and anti-apparatus, law orientation, at least, that they shared. And it seems like there was some kind of buy-in. So I'm wondering, in all of these innumerable agreements that happen, and this is always the problem with these kind of radical anti-institutional movements, is okay, we have a fundamental disagreement. How are we going to get past this? What did that decision-making process look like? And how did that kind of affect the long-term longevity? Like, it's amazing that so many other groups that have attempted similar things have splintered long beforehand. So yeah.
Yeah, well, so to make decisions, they had created kind of institutions. At least some of them describe them as institutions, like the General Assemblies, like the newspaper, like this self-organized kind of police thing, to maintain a common frame. That said, decision-making was made through these General Assemblies. Okay, so it's very classical for an anarchist space. General Assembly, but the whole question is who goes to the General Assembly? And what happened is that, to my knowledge, not everyone went to the General Assembly, and even some people kind of boycotted the General Assembly, considering that General Assembly was a dominating space, a dominative space, and that they couldn't they couldn't be heard in this space. So it was, I would say, probably as collective as possible, as far as institutions or anarchist institutions are concerned, but with tons of bias and class bias and gender bias and so on. And so I guess what allowed them to stay together so long was, at the same time, the opposition to the airport, so the common enemy, the airport, the state, capitalism, patriarchy, the common enemy, but also the fact that they didn't live together. Like, you had many different collectives, many different groups. Yeah, it's a big territory. So you had like maybe 30 kind of groups, and each of them with their own sheds and self-built housing, their names, their own culture, their own kind of identity. And some of them never met each other, or not that often. I guess it was actually a smart way of kind of be together, like dwell in the same place without living together, if it makes sense. And actually today is one of the things that is lacking, because the reduced version of the ZAD with all the cabins destroyed is also a ZAD where now cars drive on the roads. And when you go there, it looks very different, because before it was this incredible place where there was almost no cars, only broken down cars driven by people with no permit. And now it's not like that anymore. It's like regular drivers. And when I went there 3 weeks ago, some friends said, it's very weird, because we used to spend time walking down the roads or cycling, and we always met other people. And now this has disappeared, because it's like the contemporary car world that has gained more space. So they need now to find another way At the same time, probably the people who stayed now are more homogeneous socially and politically than they were before. So I don't know if that answers your questions.
Okay. Well, maybe we. But thank you so much, Jade, and thank you everyone.